You know, when you watch a movie about a bad guy, a villain, and you end up wanting to be him, you become so obsessed with the world that the movie builds for you, the soundtrack, the plots, the transformation, everything that's going on, even the messed up things. And you end up like gravitating towards it and you end up like really obsessed with everything that's going on. There's a science behind it and a psychology that we're going to touch on in this video because I believe there's a huge parallel between movies, and we're going to talk about Scorsese. I don't know about you, but I'm a huge Scorsese fan and I've been wanting to make this video for a while now. We're going to make that parallel between him, Scorsese, and luxury brands because it's the same exact thing. When we're talking about luxury brands, they talk to you about like leather, craftsmanship, material. They create stories around the things that you don't really need, because let's be honest, nobody needs a $200,000 watch, but they still end up buying it. And the reason for that is the same thing with movies. They essentially make you obsessed with the character, with the story, with what's happening there. And what we're going to cover in this video is super interesting, is obviously beyond the whole like typical things that you would see in the space, like how to build an offer, how to build a course, whatever. It's deeper than that. It's a psychology and a framework that once you apply to your own brand, people are going to have the same exact reaction. Even if you sell something that's. I had a call with somebody like they had this luxury furniture company. Like even if you sell something quote unquote weird like that, you can still make people obsessed. Okay, so this is what we're going to cover today: the psychology of storytelling. It's going to be super interesting, and we're going to dive into a couple of movies. So if you're a big movie fan, you're going to love this. Now let's touch on this. Why do we love stories so much, right? Why do we become so obsessed with stories? It's the thing when someone gives you facts, you typically evaluate the facts, right? You think, you analyze, you look for like plot holes in there. But when someone tells you a story, you essentially just feel, right? And I know it sounds silly, but you just feel, you experience, you live that entire story. Because the thing is, facts ask you to think, while stories obviously ask you to feel. And so the thing with us human beings is we make decisions based on feeling, not thinking. And then we obviously use logic to justify what we already felt. Now, the biggest thing with stories, and we're going to touch on this, is that you essentially become the character, right? So when you watch like Wolf of Wall Street, for example, your heart races during the FBI chase, your palms sweat, you feel that paranoia that the character is feeling. And Jordan Belfort is on the screen, but essentially your body responds like it's happening to you. And that's the biggest thing that I want to highlight here. If you can get your customers, your people, your audience to have that reaction you want. And the thing with this is that's not a metaphor, right? You literally feel what the character feels, right? So you become the character in that story. And for me, for example, I just finished Landman like recently, and I literally felt like I was Billy Bob, managing the cartel, dealing with the cartel, and having a fight with my wife. And that show, if you haven't watched it, go ahead and watch it. It's amazing. It's the same exact thing. I was in that world, like so, and this is what like great storytellers do, and this is what they can achieve with movies, or series. And series sometimes are like way better for this. They give you the time to essentially, become a character in that world, become the lead character. And I got so obsessed with like that world that right now I'm doing research in terms of like, if you don't know the show, it's essentially talking about the oil industry. And I'm doing research on it. And so it's like, they kind of hook me into that world. And now it's only like 2 seasons, and now I'm like hooked. Now I want more seasons. And that's the effect that you're looking for. And this is why we cry at movies, right? Why we get so angry at villains, but then we want to like become the villains. Why we feel the heartbreak for people who essentially do not exist, is because stories trick our brain into thinking we're actually living them. And this is something that we call the defense drop, and I want to touch on this because it's very interesting. So again, last night, for example, I watched the Fabulous Baker Boys. I love Michelle Pfeiffer, and the movie is essentially about these two guys, piano players, who they have their own band, they're playing gigs, but they're kind of stuck, so they need to they need to hire a singer. Michelle Pfeiffer plays the singer Susie in the movie, and essentially the movie is a super simple story. I'm not gonna drop any spoilers here, but it was the same exact thing. My whole like logic and defense or whatever you want to call it like dropped because I was so hooked by that story. And even though it was super simple, it was done really, really well. So, what is this defense drop? Because obviously, I want to touch on luxury brands and how you can actually apply this. So, stories are obviously amazing for persuasion, right? So, when someone tries to sell you something, and you might have seen this, right? Your guard goes up. You look for the catch, right? Like you essentially resist. But at the same time, like the flip side of that, when someone tells you a story, your guard just drops and you're not being sold. You don't feel like you're being sold. You feel like you're being entertained. And while your defenses are down, that is when essentially the message or the selling or whatever happens, right? Because this is why the best salespeople tell stories instead of just listing features. And I mentioned this so many times by now. Regardless of what you're selling, stop obsessing over, oh my God, I got to promote this feature. I got to talk about that. Like, don't obsess over that. Even in my own case, like with my personal brand and consulting brands and everything, like I noticed like back in 2024, I was so obsessed with, I gotta like, whenever I was having a conversation with someone, I gotta mention all of these things that I'm doing. I gotta like sell based off of features. And then I realized nobody truly gives a fuck about that. Nobody. People think they do, and obviously I'm not saying completely ditch the features. I'm saying lead with something else, lead with a story. I mentioned this in one of the previous videos. I recently had a call with someone. We started working together, and I'm basically on the call. I'm telling her about my own like personal journey, right? Like how I struggle with my personal brands, with creating content back in 2023 and 2024 even, and even the beginning of last year in 2025. I got to that point where I felt like I wasn't being myself. So I didn't talk about this. I didn't talk about the things that I'm actually into. I felt like I have to, fit the mold. I have to like be a part of this entire like space and become like them, try to fit in and whatever. And I essentially was just on the call telling her about like my struggles, but really like on a personal level, like the anxiety, the stress, the lonely nights that come with that, the pressure, everything. And it was such an emotional sort of like connection and bridge that she borderline like cried on the call. And that's what I'm highlighting here. When you when you're able to connect with people on such a deep level, it does not matter what you sell. It does not matter, like your offer doesn't matter, your whatever, like it doesn't matter. The pricing doesn't matter. Logic and the features and stuff, that's out the window. Because then you get people on that emotional level and then you can sell anything, right? So that's the whole point. This is why, by the way, religions, right, use parables instead of rules, why propaganda uses narrative, instead of arguments, because stories are backdoor into the mind, right? And we're going to cover everything in this video. So I want to touch on this. Again, I mentioned Scorsese in the beginning. He's probably my favorite like director. The way he creates stories, the everything, like the characters, it's just top notch, right? Top notch in cinema. Like to me, by far, he's like the best. So I want to essentially walk you through a couple of techniques that he's using, and then we're gonna do some parallels between these techniques and actual like luxury brands and how you can obviously implement them. So he's what I call like the master of obsession, right? Because he spent like 50 years making audiences obsessed with characters they should technically despise, right? So if we look at Goodfellas, we got Henry, we got all of these like bad like mafia guys, but we become obsessed with them. Casino is the same exact thing. We become obsessed with the character. Wolf of Wall Street, same thing. The Irishman. So we're talking criminals, murderers, con men, and we just cannot look away. So let me just break down exactly how he does this. And obviously, I'm not saying you got to be a criminal, by the way, to like sell stuff with your brand, but there are a lot of principles here and techniques that we can use. So The first one is the seductive opening. So that's the first technique. So, for example, Goodfellas opens with Henry Hill saying, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. So that's the first, what we call the seductive opening, the first line. And you can see this in pretty much like every Scorsese movie. And then he describes the life, the money, the respect, the power. Everyone wants to be your friends. Nobody can touch you. So this is what's happening with this. Before you see any violence, before you get to the real stuff, before you see the consequences, Scorsese sells you the actual dream, right? So he makes you want what Henry wants. He makes you understand the seduction. And by the time the dark stuff comes, you're already emotionally invested and you cannot turn away because you're kind of like already in love and you want to see how the story develops. You want to see the entire narrative. So this is the thing with the seductive opening. It's not about like giving people everything in the beginning. It's about seducing them first and then delivering the information, the features, whatever you want to deliver, right? Same thing here with Wolf of Wall Street, right? So they open with Jordan Belfort throwing money off of a yacht, driving a white Ferrari, the whole thing, supermodels, the chaos, the excess. And the first 20 minutes are pure seduction because you end up wanting that life before you know what it actually costs, right? So again, seductive opening on an overview level is like that. You present the world, you get people invested on an emotional level before you deliver the heavy stuff, the dark stuff, the information, whatever it is, right? The second technique here is this idea of the first person narration. And again, we're talking about Scorsese movies here. Um, Scorsese uses voiceover constantly, right? So Henry Hill talks directly to you, Jordan Belfort talks directly to you. And why does this work so well? It's because you're not just watching them. It feels like you're with them, right? They're telling you their secrets, their thoughts, the way they rationalize stuff. And this creates intimacy, right? So you become complicit to whatever it is that they're doing. You're not judging from the outside. You're inside their heads, seeing the world through their eyes. And by the time, again, they do something terrible, you understand why. And you might have done, the same thing. So you don't really judge them. So what's the point of this? You connect with them, right? You connect with them on that deep level. And regardless, you can see this with Tony Montana, right? In Scarface, regardless of like how many messed up things the character does, you're there with them and you almost identify with them because there are a lot of things in the narrative that they do that you kind of like end up relating to them even though they do a lot of like negative stuff as well. Technique number 3 with this is world building, and this is something so huge for brands. So let's cover it. The thing is, Scorsese doesn't just show you, characters. He builds entire worlds you want to live in. With Goodfellas, for example, the famous, Copacabana scene, like Henry takes, Karen through the back entrance of the club, is that like one shot scene that's super famous. It's amazing. Through the kitchen, past the workers, gets the best table in the house, and it feels like again you're there with him. That scene isn't about the plot. This is what you got to realize with scenes like that. It's not about the plot. It's about making you feel what it's like to be somebody, right? To have the access, to have the power. And this is done intentionally. This is done on purpose. Same thing with Wolf of Wall Street, the Stratton Oakmont office, right? The chaos, the energy, the money flying, the parties. Scorsese makes that world feel alive, exciting, intoxicating. So why does this work? It works because you don't just want to be the character, you want to enter the actual world, and the world becomes a character itself. This is very interesting, and you can see this with the top brands. The world becomes a character, and you'll sit through 3 hours of this, 4 hours even, just to stay inside the actual world. Technique number 4 here is the soundtrack of desire. So obviously with movies, music just like seduces us, right? Like it creates that emotional pull. And with Goodfellas, it's interesting because it uses Layla, for example, during the body discovery montage. So one of the most beautiful songs ever, right, played over images of death. So it's this contrast, this juxtaposition. Wolf of Wall Street, same thing. So they use Miss Robinson and Mercy to make excess feel fun. So why does this work? Again, super simple. Music just bypasses logic completely. So it goes straight to emotion. So when you mix beautiful music with morally, questionable images, the brain just gets confused, right? Because it feels pleasure when it should feel disgust. And this is, again, this idea of seduction. Scorsese is the best at this, and he's hyper intentional with every single scene. And we're going to see this with brands. And again, he uses this constantly, making you feel good about things you shouldn't feel good about. Juxtaposition, again. Technique number 5, delayed consequences. So this is very interesting. In Wolf of Wall Street, you don't see, the real consequences until the very end. And even then, Jordan goes to a nice prison and becomes a, motivational speaker, as that scene at the end with like sell me the pen. Very good. In Goodfellas, right? The good times last for like what, an hour before things actually turn dark. And the reason why this works is Scorsese lets you enjoy the fantasy long enough to actually get addicted. So keep this in mind with your audience. You have to find a way, regardless of the industry, to get them addicted before, the logic, before them trying to price shop, before them trying to compare the features that your brand has versus a different feature. You can see this with Apple. People in the Apple ecosystem are absolutely obsessed, right? Like if I get a new iPhone, I don't get a new iPhone because it has the best, typically, right? Because it has the best features ever, or like I'm not gonna compare the iPhone to Samsung or whatever. I'm gonna get the iPhone because I'm addicted to the Apple ecosystem. And again, ecosystem with this and world building, these are, amazing techniques. So with Scorsese, for example, if he showed consequences immediately, you would never fall in love, right? You would never fall in love. So he delays the pain until you're already obsessed. And this is exactly what makes gambling, for example, addictive, because the wins come before the losses. It's the whole dopamine hit, right? And by the time you're actually losing, you're already hooked to this. And this is why I wanted to cover the Scorsese part first, because there are a lot of parallels that we can draw with luxury brands. So it's the same playbook. Because everything Scorsese does, luxury brands do the same thing. So they're not making ads, they're making films. They're not selling products, they're building worlds that you want to enter. And we have one of the best case studies in here. I talked about it plenty of times. The Chanel campaign that they did with Penelope Cruz and Brad Pitt in here. So in 2012, Chanel hired Brad Pitt for their number 5 campaign. So he was actually the first male spokesperson in the brand's history. So the ad was like this: black and white, Brad Pitt staring into the camera, speaking in cryptic philosophical fragments. And it was like, it's not a journey. Every journey ends, but we go on. The world turns and we turn with it. Plans disappear, dreams take over, but wherever I go, there you are. My luck, my fate, my fortune. Chanel number 5, inevitable. Right? That was it. So as you can see with this, there's a magic to this ad and to this campaign, because there's no product shots until the end, right? Like no list of ingredients, no explanation of the scent. It is pure mood, right? Pure seduction, pure world building. And this is the seductive opening, right? You got to sell the feeling before you sell the product, and make people want the worlds before they know what's in the actual like battle, what's in it. We can see the same thing here with Ferrari, with Enzo, because they tell the story of Enzo the way Scorsese tells the story of Jordan Belfort, and it's super interesting because Enzo was, obsessed. He was very difficult, impossible to work with. Very similar. He reminds me of Steve Jobs. So he wasn't like the best guy ever, right? That you would want to have around. He cared more about racing than anything else. He rejected customers. He demanded perfection, and he never compromised. And Ferrari does not hide this at all in their marketing, because they turned this into what we call a myth, right? Similar to Scorsese's technique. So this is making you root for someone you essentially might not root for in real life. You might hate the guy in real life, but it doesn't matter, because with the brand, you actually root for him. So Enzo was probably, again, not the best guy to be around, but through the storytelling, Ferrari makes his obsession romantic, something that you would want to be a part of. And again, this is very interesting because it's the same exact playbook that Luxury brands apply to get people hooked, to get people obsessed. So that's why when when you sit and wonder, like, why do people drop 20,000, 50,000 for a bag? Why do people drop so much money? Why do they, why are they so obsessed with the branding, with the logos, with the feeling? It's because of that. It's because that obsession is engineered. Everything is super intentional. So let's go over now the four elements of storytelling that, make people obsessed, and let's cover everything. So the first element in here is you want to have a world, you want to build a world that people want to enter. That's what you want to build, similar to the movies, right? So Goodfellas makes you want to enter the mafia worlds. Wolf of Wall Street makes you want to enter the excess world. Chanel, on the other side, with, like, brands, they make you want to enter the elegant, mysterious worlds. Rolex make you want to, enter that achievement world. So for your brand, because I want this to be really practical, you got to ask yourself, what worlds am I building? Am I building a universe here? Something that people actively want to be a part of. Not what, products you're selling. What reality are you creating that people want to be a part of? And describe that world, the values, the aesthetics, the feeling of being inside it. And as you can see with everything that I'm doing, for example, when it comes to aesthetics, everything needs to, first of all, fit your style. And, you have to build something that you genuinely like. But then, second of all, you have to be intentional with the way you design everything. You can see this with artists, obviously, movies, the big brands. We just covered Chanel. So everything needs to be intentional. So people become hooked to that, right? That's the first element. The second element in here is a character you want to become, right? So Henry Hill, Jordan Belfort, Coco Chanel, Enzo Ferrari, we don't just watch these people. We want to be these people. We want to be them, or at least, we want to get pieces of what they have. So for your brand, who is the character at the center of your brand? It might be you, right? It might be the archetypal customer, but what do they represent? What traits do they embody? What do people become when they buy from you? These are all questions that, once you map out, and this is literally everything that I'm doing with people when I'm doing consultation calls, when I'm doing one-on-one mentorship, we map everything out. Could be a clothing brand, could be someone working in private equity, could be someone working in as a mindset coach. It's the same exact thing. I mentioned a luxury company, like a luxury furniture company. It's the same thing. What is the character, right? What is the character that people are trying to embody? I'm working with one of the biggest fashion brands across the state, across the US, and we had this conversation. And I literally told them, like, you embody the character that people need to become or want to become. So we got to talk, like, we got to share a lot about your story. We have to essentially treat this like a movie. Similar to, like, we're drawing a lot of parallels with that brand with, like, James Bond. When you look at James Bond, you want to be him. You want to not only, like, dress like him, you want to have his confidence, you want to have, obviously, the girls, you want to have the access, you want to have the adrenaline. So this is all about feeling. And again, you got to map all of this out. The third element in here is you want to apply seduction before you deliver information, right? So Scorsese sells you the dream before essentially shoving you the nightmare. So he doesn't start with the negative stuff. He doesn't start with the heavy stuff, the things that are complicated to grasp. He starts with the dream. And luxury brands sell you, again, the feeling before showing you the price. Obviously, if you've walked, like, I remember I was in 2022, I was in Paris. So there was this big street with all of these luxury brands like Celine, Tom Ford, Saint Laurent, whatever. So I was with one of my best friends, and I was like, okay, I want to step into, the Saint Laurent store. We go there, everything is an experience, right? It's not about the price tag. It's not about, you don't even see the price tag. Everything is about, they serve you water, right? They serve you some coffee, whatever. They have a conversation with you. They ask about, like, how's your experience in Paris? Where you're from. They get you hooked, right? So when they get you hooked, at that point you almost feel like, now I feel like I owe them in a way, or I feel like I'm in that world. They talk to you about like what Saint Laurent represents, the story behind it. I, for example, I love the story behind Saint Laurent. Is one of my, my like favorite brands. And so at that point, it's not just about the jacket. It's like, oh, this jacket has this leather, whatever. They mention that towards the end when they essentially sell you the actual jacket. But there's this thing with sales, and I had this conversation with one of my friends today. If somebody tells you, oh, you're a good salesman, this is what he told me, then that means you didn't do a good job, because the best salespeople make you feel like you're not being sold to at all. Keep this in mind whenever you have a conversation, whenever you want to pitch. Listen to the person more than you speak. Obviously, be human about it. Share your story, create that emotional connection, that emotional bridge, and genuinely try to help. No matter what your brand or offer is, the offer doesn't matter. Because when you do that, again, you bypass logic. You bypass the logic. So don't operate from this place of, I got to deliver a lot of information. Deliver the seduction. Cover the seduction first. So again, for your brands, right? What I just said right now, lead with emotion, lead with the desire, leads with the actual fantasy. Don't do this right here. And I used to, I fucked up a lot with this. Don't start with the features. Don't start with the credentials. Don't start with like, here's what we do. Don't be, and this is honestly, this is putting you in that mode of like scarcity. Like, this is what we do. This is what we can help. Like, don't do that. Start with the fantasy. Start with, here's the world. Here's the feeling. Here's how you become. Because information can always come after they're already hooked. That's the seduction before information. Now, element number 4 here is what we call multi-sensory experience. So Scorsese obviously uses music, cinematography, pacing, voiceover, all of these things. And every sense is engaged, right? So how do we draw the parallel to luxury brands? Well, they use visual aesthetics, texture, scent, sound, packaging, and every touch point is intentionally being designed. So for your brand, stories, you got to realize they're not just words. It's not just you getting on camera, like delivering a story, doing a video. You got to ask, what does your brand look like, sound like, feel like? Is every touch point immersive? Does your website, for example, feel like entering a world? Does your content create a sensory experience? Like, the more senses you engage, the deeper the obsession becomes, right? If you go on my Instagram and even on my YouTube channel, everything is, you can see the burgundy color, you can see like everything is designed to make you feel something. And I'm gonna touch on this because I think it's super interesting. And when I made the change, to some of you watching, this might seem like so superficial and it might seem like dumb, but I made the change like about like 4 months or 5 months ago. Can't remember exactly when. I essentially had this like black, sort of like dark aesthetic, which I, to a degree, I still do, but I changed from that to this burgundy sort of aesthetic, and then it came like, everything, like the glasses. I essentially dress like how I dress in real life. Like, this is not forced. I was like, let me just take the aesthetic that I love and, use it in my brand. I'm telling you, like, something happened to the point where, like, higher and higher and higher level people started to reach out to work with me. Brands, people in private equity, like, I'm talking people that, we're talking like millions, millionaires, and this is interesting because before, um, I didn't attract, I wasn't attracting that kind of caliber of people. And again, it might sound silly, it might sound superficial, it might sound weird, but it's, you got to cover every kind of like touch point and every sense. So again, don't just think about like, okay, storytelling and stories are just words and I got to write a lot of emails, right? I got to do like, that's fine. But think about what senses are you engaged, like the colors, right? Even the music that you choose in your videos, the aesthetic, everything should fall into place, right? Now, with this, what I want to touch on is obviously this. You got to treat your brand like a film, like a movie. You got to treat your brand like that. Don't look at it like, I'm just building my personal brand or I'm just creating videos. No. Like, treat this as an actual film, like a fucking Oscar winning movie. And again, stop thinking of yourself as just as a business owner. Start thinking of yourself as a director, right? Because you're not creating products or just content, you're creating a film that never ends. And the worlds people can enter and actually stay in. And look, when you make this change, I promise you, content and everything that you do on a 360 level, everything that you do is going to become so much more fun. And you're actually going to have fun with this. I'm not going to drop any names, but I'm looking around in my own space when we're talking about branding, when we're talking about, people helping other people with their offers, with their brands, with their strategy, whatever. They talk about the same bullshit over and over again. This is how you build your funnel. This is how you build your offer. This is how you build your course. This is how you run ads. And again, I fell into that trap. I'm not sitting here talking like as if I'm perfect, right? But I had to like kind of, wake up and realize like, I don't want to talk about the same shit like over and over again. I want to treat this like a movie. And even now, what I'm doing right now, I feel like is still like only 5% or like 2% of like what I really am and what I really embody and the things that I can do. And in the future, I will do a lot more like cinematic stuff. Because everything to me, I used to, if you're new to the channel, I used to be before business. I had 3 companies. I was running from 2023 up until 2024 at the end. Before all of this, I used to make music. I was an independent artist. And to this day, I'm taking a lot of elements from that, from my music career, and applying them here. And there's a reason why, sometimes we feel so burned out by creating content because it's the same bullshit over and over again. And this is why I said, like, start thinking of yourself as this director. And you're directing this amazing movie that never ends, that has a world, that has an aesthetic, and that essentially gets people hooked, right? So here are a couple of things that I want to touch on that directors do that I think you should do and they will help you a lot. So number one thing, they have a vision, obviously. So Scorsese knows exactly what he wants you to feel. Every choice serves that vision, right? So what do you want people to feel when they encounter your brand? You got to define it precisely, because branding is not, it's not just colors. It's not just like the logo. It's not the website. It's not your Instagram page. Branding is essentially that feeling that people get when they interact with your brand. That's the whole thing. With me, it's not about the burgundy color. It's not about like, it's not about like the glasses or the aesthetics for my presentations or anything like that. It's about the overall feeling. Because I've designed this for a specific person. And guess what? I am working with those people. So it works. Is this for everybody? Fuck no. A lot of people look at this and they might say, this is weird, whatever. Okay, it's not for you. It's fine. This is for a specific type of person. And this is how you got to look at it. The vision that you have will not appeal to everybody. The vision that you have will not make everybody happy. But your job is to clearly, again, define this precisely to the point where those people that are meant for you will be completely obsessed. They will be your loyal fans. That's the whole point. Now, another thing that directors do in here is they obsess over details, obviously. So, to draw a parallel, like, don't become too obsessed to the point where you overthink everything, but be intentional with your website, with your emails, your packaging, your content. Every detail should reinforce the story that you want to deliver. Directors, they cast carefully. So Scorsese cast actors, who embody his characters. So for your brand, you got to ask yourself, who am I going to associate with? Who do you want to collaborate with? Again, choose intentionally. Everything needs to be done on purpose. And obviously, last but not least, they build worlds, not products, right? So we touched on this, but Scorsese doesn't make just crime movies. He builds immersive universes. So you're not selling a product. Again, you're building a world that people want to live in. That's the whole thing. And then in the end, again, ask yourself, if your brand was a film, what genre would it be? Who would direct it, right? Who would direct your movie? What would the opening, seductive opening scene look like? What music would play? How would people feel walking out of the theater, right? And answer these questions and then build your brand to match that. And what we're covering here is, again, something so much deeper than just, selling an offer, building a funnel. Because those things, the strategy is good, right? The strategy is good. The technical, nerdy stuff, building an email sequence and building a backend stuff is important. But what's more important than that is this, because this is the core of what you're building. So go through the video again. I know it was in depth, but again, if you like movies, if you love movies like I do, hopefully you enjoy this, this video as much as I enjoy making it. And I'm gonna see you in the next one.